everybody, I'm Logan Crawford, and this is the award-winning TV talk show right here on Ebru. Fresh Outlook. We begin today with a look at America honoring its war heroes on Veterans Day. The U.S. now employs an all-volunteer army. The challenges are many and unique. Not all are touched by wars, as in generations in the past. Take a look.
As the U.S. president met with Asian leaders, his deputy Joe Biden paid tribute to military service members in honor of Veterans Day. In tandem with tradition, Biden laid a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns in Arlington National Cemetery.
You are, the veterans of America, the most trusted among us and the most tested of all Americans. You are not only the heart and soul, but you are the very spine of this nation. Defense
Secretary Chuck Hagel spoke to veterans at the Vietnam Memorial.
Because our nation's policies must always be worthy of the sacrifices we ask of the men and women who defend our country.
But stoic speeches were not the only ones given to veterans. First Lady Michelle Obama had a military-themed episode of Doc McStuffins screened for veteran families, and she praised little heroes.
Because you guys are sacrificing just as much as your moms and dads are. We're all so proud of you, and you're so special, so we wanted to celebrate with you by showing you an episode of Doc McStuffins.
Veterans Day commemorations will also include a National Mall concert featuring Bruce Springsteen.
Okay, we are back live on set now here at Fresh Outlook. I am joined by the Ebru think tank, Jackie Guzda, media analyst at Western Connecticut State University, Admiral Robert Wray, the CEO of the Blue Star Veterans Network, and Dr. Janie Feldman, a clinical psychologist from Warren, New Jersey. Admiral, I'm going to start with you. It's a point I made at the beginning of the segment. We don't all have skin in this game anymore when it comes to veterans because it's a volunteer army. It used to be all of us were touched by war.
That's true. There are fewer Americans that have served in the defense forces than ever. And so out of really only 1 out of 10 Americans has ever been a vet, and only 1 out of 7 of current vets served in the current conflict. So you can see it's nearly 1 out of 100 Americans is out there wearing a uniform since 9/11.
And growing up, it seemed like all of our dads were Vietnam-era vets or World War II-era vets. Everybody at least had somebody in their family who was connected to this. Plus, you lived in fear of the draft, that you might get called up and have to go serve your country.
Right. Well, again, the numbers are staggering. 16 million Americans wore a uniform in World War II. Vietnam era, with the draft, about 6 or 7 million Americans. Since 9/11, less than 3 million Americans. So you see the numbers, and as you pointed out earlier, it takes less people to fight the kind of wars that we're fighting now than it did before.
We're seeing fewer people die on the battlefield, more people being saved, but we're seeing more people come home with grievous injuries, correct?
Yes. People are coming home with injuries that frankly they used to die from in Vietnam or Korea or World War II. So it places a new burden on the country, a new responsibility to take care of those folks that we have saved on the battlefield, but now we have to bring them home and try to rehabilitate them.
And that's where the Blue Star Veterans Network comes in. I'm going to talk to you about that in just a second, but first I'm going to talk to Dr. Janie Feldman. We talked about some of these life-changing injuries. I was in Manhattan during the marathon, and I saw person after person without limbs.
Yes.
Most appeared to be war veterans. Mm-hmm. This has a physical toll, but it also has a psychological toll.
Absolutely. People go into the military with expectations and dreams of glory and success, and some fears as well, but perhaps one of the most troubling and life-changing things is coming home disfigured and having to deal with that. And I think so many people are just not prepared for it because it's something we haven't seen before. As you said, people used to just die from those injuries, and now they're forced to recover and function in the world that isn't really ready for them in the way that we would hope they could be.
And Jackie, when I was thinking about this issue before and your involvement in it, I thought about the media coverage. When I was growing up, we'd sit around the dinner table and watch the scroll of people who had died during the conflict. And my parents and I and my siblings would watch closely to see, did anybody I know die? Now the wars are hardly mentioned unless there's something catastrophic that's happened.
That's right. There's such a disconnect between us. You quoted the numbers. And, you know, the only connection that I find that people have today are their sons and daughters going over there. I know I have students who, and I've had students who have PTSD, and they bring it back into the classroom. They bring it back into their jobs when they come back here. That's the only connect. As you know, when the caskets were coming home from Iraq, Dick Cheney said, no, we can't show them, it's disrespectful. But you know, as you say, during Vietnam, it was a reminder of the sacrifices that were being made and the young men and women that were losing. And I think it's important that there is a connection between those of us who are not in the military and those who are over there fighting, losing their limbs, coming back in those caskets. I think it's an important thing for the media to work on, to go back and reconnect those people with whoever is left at home.
I agree 100%. Admiral, tell me a little bit about the Blue Star Veterans Network, what you're trying to do with your organization.
Well, veteran care is really elder care, because almost half of Americans' veterans are over the age of 65. And a strange statistic, if you look at all Americans over the age of 65, 50% of them are either a veteran or the spouse of a veteran. So Blue Star exists to help older veterans and their spouses age gracefully and with freedom at home. And we enable that with technology and with services that we can deliver to them in their homes. And so those are safety issues, health monitoring issues, connection issues, brain fitness software, things like that.
And caring for our veterans is paramount, and it's come into focus now because of the VA scandal. And again, I'm going to call upon my own personal experience. My father went to the VA his whole life. He always waited all day long to see a doctor. It's always been a nightmare. So when people said, hey, there are long lines at the VA, this is breaking news, it wasn't breaking news to me because in the 1970s it was happening.
The VA is a huge organization, and it can be bureaucratically challenged, to put it nicely. And there have been stories of VA waiting for a long time. I think people probably still wait once they get into the clinic. The issue of the waiting in this case was that people were waiting months just to get in the door and choose to wait all day long. Now the statistics are getting better, and the VA is turning a corner, but it's such a huge ship of state. I mean, making it turn is like trying to move an aircraft carrier with a canoe paddle. It's slowly happening, and it's going in the right direction.
Janie, tell me a little bit about how PTSD and the other issues that returning veterans are dealing with impact not only them, but their families and their communities.
Well, post-traumatic stress disorder is a real thing that happens when we've been exposed to something that is traumatic and we can't shake the memory. So we relive it, it comes back and haunts us in our dreams, in our waking lives, and it comes up and it makes us avoid certain things. It changes us emotionally, it changes us in terms of how we deal with things. And so for someone in facing PTSD is so completely different, and in a way just going out of their mind, dealing with the horrors that they've experienced that they really weren't prepared for, and yet are facing normal civilian life, trying to move on and forget. And they really, really need VA services and support of the media and the country in terms of being able to move forward. But for family, it's very perplexing to watch someone who doesn't have, well, they might have the amputation or outward scars, but many times people with post-traumatic stress disorder don't show their scars on the outside. It's something emotional and psychological on the inside, and it really can be devastating for the entire family.
Ticking time bomb in many cases if treatment isn't received as well. Jackie, let me ask you a little bit about this. Bob Woodruff had part of his brain blown out in, I believe it was Iraq. He was a living example of just how people are suffering grievous injuries during the war and how the media can help tell the story. He was a lead network anchor, went over to do a field report, was injured, and is now no longer the lead anchor, but is a reporter.
Right. I remember when that happened. See, I think what the media can do is put a face on our veterans and what they've gone through. When you take individual cases like Bob Woodruff's, or you take some little-known young man, young woman from Iowa, wherever, and you show exactly what has happened to them, that is what is going to make people care. That's what's going to reconnect us with the veterans. And I think it's important we do that.
One story sometimes tells so much more than statistics about a million or so people. You see one person at home. Admiral, let me ask you a little bit about what you think the challenges are for the United States as we have 550 soldiers a day drawing down now from Afghanistan as that conflict seems to resolve.
Well, it's a good point. About 250,000 people a year are hanging up their uniform and entering civilian society. And there are a myriad of issues that we have to deal with. The first issue is employment. Veteran employment is generally good for older vets. It is not good for younger vets under the age of 30. We have to worry about mental health, particularly as delivered by the VA, to cover the PTSD and those kind of issues of depression. I can tell you, coming back from a war zone and trying to integrate back into civilian society is very, very difficult, even for mature and people that have employment and families to come home to. It's much, much harder when you're in your 20s. We have to deal with suicide rates, and which are higher. We have to deal with homelessness. It's sort of all the things that affect any society today affect that veteran subset of the society, sometimes in negative ways.
And we see a lot of relationships nowadays being fractured by many modern day stresses. Some of these soldiers return to find they don't have a wife waiting for them at home anymore or a husband waiting for them at home anymore, and that's one of the challenges as well. Well,
the divorce rates are very much higher for veterans, particularly veterans that are returning from multiple tours of duty in the desert. And it places huge stresses on the family. I was the child of a deployed vet back in the Vietnam War, and then I was a deployed vet, and now I'm very old and gnarly, and my sons are deploying vets. And I can tell you, it's way tougher on the family than on the vet.
Absolutely. Joe Biden has sons who are engaged in the military. He points to them every now and then as an example of service to the community, but I don't feel that connection between him in the administration and the armed services. Am I alone in that, or do you feel that Biden has a strong role in supporting our vets?
I think Biden is a very strong supporter. Her son, who's the Attorney General in Delaware, was deployed to the desert and has come home and now is put back on his civilian suit. And so I think Biden is a big proponent, as I think is President Obama, and frankly, I think everybody in Congress. There's nobody that isn't supporting veterans and their causes. Support is one thing, trying to figure out exactly how to make things better is a different one.
Got about 45 seconds left. Janie, let me ask you a little bit about your thoughts on Veterans Day as we celebrate it this year.
Well, it was striking to me how many people were speaking up about what's going wrong in the country right now in terms of the support that veterans need in terms of integration. They do need more support in terms of economics, but also there's a great amount of substance abuse going on, because think of how horrific it is to come home, not find your family, not have the world receiving you so well, having a difficult time getting a job. There's so many adjustment difficulties. They really need
We're going to move to Jackie. Jackie, what's your final thought?
That I think it's very important now that you're talking about this for the administration in the last 2 years to make a connection with the vets, to get Joe Biden out there speaking and get this connection going.
Right. And I think the First Lady has tried to do that. Admiral, we have about 10 seconds left. What do you want the folks at home? Let's talk specifically about your Blue Star Veterans Network. What can they do to help?
If someone knows older vets, they can sign up for our network for free and get lots of good free support. There's no downside to it. And the bottom line, in my view, is America's support of veterans, it's never perfect, but it is so much, much better now than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And so, in general, us vets want to thank America for the support they're providing.
And we thank you, sir, and I thank you for joining us today, Admiral Robert Wray of the Blue Star Veterans Network. When we come back, net neutrality, you've heard the term, but what does it mean, and what will it mean for your online habits? More on that after this.